Welcome, Susan. Thank you for doing this podcast. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Abby.
So today we have Susan Martin, who's joining us. She's the founder and CEO of Smart in Planning. And so maybe if I can start off with just doing a quick introduction about you, and then you can perhaps fill in the gaps, just do a quick recap on there.
Sure.
So obviously you've been with the industry for almost 25 years in retail, in merchandise planning, worked for a number of years in South Africa, then moved across to Australia, worked with large multi-brand retailers like Cotton On. Then you set up your own consulting business to help retailers be more effective in their planning and merchandising, called Smart in Planning, which has been going very well. And yeah, anything else that perhaps you can add into it?
Oh, I think you've captured it there. It's I guess it's a long time to be in the same field, 25 years. Effectively doing the same thing, but I guess that that just confirms that I still find it really engaging, and to me there's still a lot of mileage in merchandise planning. As a career, it's been very fulfilling, and with Smart in Planning as the latest chapter in that, I'm hugely engaged. I'm still hugely I guess passionate about retail, and it's just kept fulfilling that promise of being so dynamic. So it's been a good run.
Perfect. And obviously with your different hats that you wear, because you've been involved in different parts of the business as well, obviously in senior leadership position, training, coaching, speaking, helping with strategy and insights, being a consultant, being in the business. From all these different things that you've done so far, what have you enjoyed the most, or what do you enjoy the most now?
I think it's actually the people. I've always been a people person. I love the relationships. I love the engagement. So through all of those different things that you've just talked about now, it's always about that interaction, and I think the problem solving. My whole life I've had a real passion for service. I thought I'd land up in the hospitality industry, and somehow I landed up in retail instead. But I think what I've probably done the whole way along is treated my career or the contribution that I make as a bit of a service, so all of those things really gives me that opportunity. I really do love that. I love working with people, getting to know people, and then trying to solve problems, and that's probably it more than anything. And then like I mentioned a moment ago, just how dynamic retail is. I love that too, and planning gives me a way to really dig into the layers that's in retail, and I love how it's always changing, and there's always a new challenge, and so it keeps it fresh. It's not a desk job, that's for sure.
I can completely relate to that, completely. and talking about planning and people, obviously COVID has had a significant impact on our industry, and there was the initial shock of COVID, and now there was the initial things to be able to survive and put that in place. What are and now that we've been into this for about 6-7 months almost, what are some of the challenges that your clients are still grappling with, or you're seeing it constantly keep coming up?
So I think some of the challenges that became evident quite quickly, they're still valid. Certainly from a planning perspective, that concern around cash flow, because it's about investing in inventory, and that can take a bit of cash, and having the cash flow to be nimble, maybe carry some excess inventory if they've needed to. That came to the fore very early on. It's still a concern. Of course, there's the practicalities and the safety related things, which, certainly, from a staff point of view and a customer point of view, those things go without saying, really. So I won't focus on those. I think what's still really there is that uncertainty, because, we use phrases like the new normal, and when it all started, it was, a lot of what does it mean? And we had to learn new ways of doing things, and we had to start working remotely and all of that sort of stuff. And now we've got this new normal, this new way that we're working, but it's actually, we're still just in limbo. We're still only speculating about what comes next. We're still only speculating about what the new normal really will be. I think there've been, real shifts in supply and demand, real shifts in the marketplace, market share, and there's an awareness to those things now more than there was, early on. But we actually still don't have the answers. And there's no way of knowing how that's going to unfold. So I think even though we've sort of been experiencing it for, the better part of 6 months or whatever it's been, and so we think we know what retail in COVID looks like and means, and we've seen the innovation, and we've seen the businesses pivoting, and all the other catchphrases, we actually are still just in limbo, and we don't know what comes next. So I think that's still making it incredibly hard for businesses to plan ahead with any confidence. So, we're learning new skills, and we're learning to be more agile, and we're learning to, be ready to change. But that doesn't take away the reality that stock's coming or not coming, and it's the right stock or the wrong stock, and that the market has shifted again since that decision was made. So I think that's still a very it's something businesses have to keep grappling with, and setting budgets and planning ahead in that respect. I think they're still finding very challenging, a lot of uncertainty in that space.
I think, as you said, that because I think we call it the new normal, but it's just new from yesterday.
Yeah.
We don't exactly if this is how long it's going to be this way, because and I think that disrupts businesses from making a slightly longer term decision.
Yes.
And saying that, this is how we're going to be.
Yeah.
But I think it's fair to recognize that the transition to e-commerce has probably been accelerated because of COVID.
Yeah, for sure.
It was bound to happen. But something that would have happened in, say, 5 years, as an example, probably has been done in 3 months.
Yes.
So that brings a whole host of issues for retailers.
Yes.
But do you think they can make the switch quick enough? Or what are some of the, because there's so many challenges in that, capability, funding, etc. So any thoughts on that you're seeing already emerging?
Yeah.
So,
it's... I think it's going to be very varied. I mean, the evidence is there. There are already a lot of businesses that have achieved some amazing things. There's some great success stories, and they're very inspiring. And I guess some of those businesses were on varying degrees of that path already. Maybe they had already formulated some of their strategic thinking. I personally, I think there's a bit of a common theme with this sort of thing. I think strategy and leadership and vision will be some of the point of difference as to who manages to pull it off and who doesn't. Of course, there are financial considerations, and it takes investment, and so some of that's just the reality of it. Some businesses won't be as well positioned to maybe invest as much as they need to or want to. But still, the success of the execution, I think, will link all the way back to, how is that being driven from a leadership point of view? What was the strategy? What was the vision? Where were they trying to go? How clear were they on that? How well have they communicated that effectively through the business? How well have they selected the relevant partners and experts to work with them on that? They may or may not have the right skill set within their business, because this is maybe something new or something they hadn't built towards yet, hadn't tooled up for yet in terms of their, their people equity. And, identifying those right partners, especially maybe in a field that you're not that familiar with yet. How do you know whether you're picking, the right people to work with? So I think that's actually where a lot of it will, will happen or not happen successfully. But yeah, there's probably also, when it comes to the infrastructure that goes with that, I don't think you can just take e-com and pop it on top of something else and go, there you go, cherry on the top, e-com done, and away we go. You're putting it on top of other infrastructure. So, however good that foundation previously was, I imagine is going to either help or hinder that transformation or that evolution. And, particularly for some of the bigger businesses, yes, sometimes they've got more money than the small businesses. But their infrastructure could be bigger and older. The bigger and older it is, the more expensive and disruptive it is to change, for the business. And I think that's going to be a challenge, I think, for quite a few businesses. But there'll definitely be some that will leapfrog the gap and surprise us all. We will think that they just weren't well positioned for it, and next thing they'll come bursting through with a great result, and that'll be good to see.
Yeah, and I think as you mentioned that it's about that the execution risk. There might be retailers who've got the common goal, right? They all want to transition, they want to do this, but how well do you execute? Because everyone has the funding constraints, capability constraints, but how do you strategize and say these are the things we're going to do, and we're going to do it well, and also in phases, because otherwise can't boil the whole ocean.
Well, that's right. Yeah, I mean the speed of execution, and this is always the tricky thing for businesses as well when they are looking at new technologies or just change in the business, is capacity. Because the business was already operating with everybody full-time on whatever their day job was. And so whenever you try and bring something else in, you've got to create the capacity for that. And that typically means you've got to deprioritize something else. And so again, in terms of executing that change, that I guess application of resources is going to be quite key as well.
True. And also talking about data and making decisions and making informed decisions. What's the reliance, I know, in the industry on, say, merchandising planning? There's a lot of reliance on Excel.
Yeah.
You Excel to do all your analysis, etc. Is that still the case, or are retailers generally leveraging the right tools, assets that they can?
I do think, look, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a merchandise planner who can or will do their job without Excel. Excel is a fabulous tool, but it is a tool. It's not a system or technology in that sense. I think it's a bit of a mixed bag as to, how far that dependence on Excel goes, and where is it appropriate to go with the Excel use? Again, bigger businesses tend to have more of that technology and infrastructure in place. Smaller businesses tend to have to do a lot more, in which case they often rely on Excel a lot. But I would say, it's heavy use even into some really big businesses, and that's well and good to a point. Excel has its merits. It's flexible and really great for ad hoc type things. But I guess it depends on data that's coming from somewhere else. The Excel doesn't create the data. Excel holds the data and allows you to manipulate the data. The information has to come from somewhere else. It has to be collected somewhere else. And I think that there's obviously technologies dedicated to that, and they're pretty key. I will say that probably some of that data is still quite lacking. Certainly lacking for merchandise planning purposes. It needs to contain the right metrics. It needs to be tracking the right things. It needs to be complete. It needs to be accessible. And so even businesses that do have, the technology, they don't always have it quite to that same degree that it would be needed for planning. And markdowns are a good example of that. I'd say that's one of the ones that is most common. Speaking to businesses and needing to work with them, to achieve a planning outcome, and then you'll often find that they don't have that markdown information captured really well and tracked really well, or they don't have historic information on closing stock positions. And so when you want to access the data to use an Excel, even if they didn't have all the planning suite, sometimes there are holes and gaps. So that's a challenge for sure.
So it's the because I think a lot of the retailers would say the data is all there, but again, extracting the information for analysis becomes a challenge, because
Yeah.
everyone intuitively knows that yes, if we get good data, we'll get good decision
Yes.
making. But just willing to make that effort into getting the right data, and sometimes it's just, I know some retailers would just do it on gut feel.
Mm.
Yeah, this is
Yes.
working, and sort of it becomes a bit of hit and miss. But I don't know whether that, the decision making science behind it is applied as rigorously as it could be.
Yeah, no, I think there's still room to go on that. It's one thing sort of having the data, having the systems to collect and work with that data. That's one part, and Excel can play its role there. When it comes to I guess data-based decision making versus gut feel, I think I actually feel that's come a long way. So if I think back 20 years to the types of conversations that I was hearing, in retailers or participating in weekly trade meetings and so on, and some pretty big decisions that were being made, strategic decisions. Back then, I definitely found myself scratching my head a little bit and going, that's a big decision to have made on, I'm not sure what data. I kind of feel like that was a real bold gut decision. And I'm not saying those are wrong or don't have their place. They do. And I think, some incredible results have actually been achieved with someone just going, I'm backing myself. I see an opportunity or I see a gap and I'm just going after it. So I'm not having a knock at that stuff. But just, your sort of your everyday trade and decision making and so on. I think there's two big shifts that have happened there probably. One is just a practical thing, which is overall technological advancement. Data is easier to get than it used to be. It's cheaper to store by a long way than it used to be. There's more choice about how to access it and manipulate it because, of all the technologies and software and so on that have become available. So I think all of that really enables more data-based decision making and makes it, I always say if you want people to do the right thing, make it easy for them to do it. If you don't want people to litter, put rubbish bins where people are likely to have, stuff to throw away, and then they'll do the right thing. So I feel like it's a little bit of that kind of dynamic with the data is it's become more accessible and all of those things, so people access it more and use it more. Alongside that as well, I think because it's progressed on a personal level, it just becomes more familiar and natural. So, we're all used to working with a device. We're used to a level of AI associated with our personal lives. And even things like the term, I'll Google it, tells you that people have an automatic response to, I'll go and get the right information to make a choice or to make a decision. So I think all of those practicalities just naturally have supported a move to more data-based decision making. And then I think beyond that, there's a culture that's been probably driven through e-commerce a lot. And again, that's me sitting in my planning seat. I feel like before, when planning, people have wanted to talk about data and using data for decision making, that it's been a little bit of a yawn fest and oh my goodness, are you people going to start talking numbers again? Whereas I feel like e-com were the cool kids that came in and started talking about data and metrics that probably felt a little bit more accessible and that people could understand more easily, could relate to a little bit more easily, started to value, follow, appreciate, and that's opened the door a little bit, which has meant planning can sort of sneak in while it's open and have more of those sorts of conversations. And I think that's been the groundswell to more database decision making. Does that answer your question? I think that's...
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's that initial thing of, oh, it's a new shiny tool, we don't need it, to then becoming quite that the reason we need it is to make, because the users will be able to easily access the right products. Yes. And what we are selling, and also the division between being able to use it just for e-com, but also for your physical business.
Definitely.
Which is predominantly the larger business for most retailers. So
definitely.
The gap between the using data for one particular part of the business, but not relying on the same data for
yes,
part of business.
Yes. I think that all the e-com part is it's whet the appetite for that way of thinking. I think it because it was its own thing, and because it brought its own sort of set of metrics initially, and because it was cool and interesting, and all, and the new toy. I think it got that starting point, and then that's kind of opened it up for a greater application and reliance on data, and awareness of its importance, and it's just made it more common language, and yeah.
Fair enough, and also. Talking about uncertainty and with COVID and the change of retail that was already going on, how would a leader be effective in these times, like during this time of crisis? How do you actually make sure that you're being able to? Because there's so many things you could be doing, but what are some of the things that either you're doing already or you're seeing good leaders, effective leaders do that is getting cut through as well?
It's a tough one, and I don't know that the leadership package that is going to be effective now in these times particularly. I don't know that it's actually any different to the leadership package that is always successful and that always gets cut through. I feel like there are those time-honored things about leadership that play out again and again, and I referenced it before, and I talk about it a lot. Is coming back to that strategic thinking. Just being able to sort of take a deep breath and be calm and think about what strategically are we trying to achieve here? Where are we trying to get to? And then the communication that goes with that, so that everybody else can understand that strategy and that vision, and be on that execution path and kept informed. And particularly now, I think a leader with a bit of heart as well, will do well. Somebody who really does have a people first mentality, isn't overly operationally focused, but realizes that that there's more of that ecosystem that is required to produce a result. Personally, something I have always valued, in leadership, and something that I try to be as consistent. And it maybe sounds like a boring leadership characteristic. I place a huge amount of value on it, because I think people, when they know what to expect from someone, they can really relax and do their job well, focus on the things they need to. I think when a leader's erratic and hot and cold and in a rush and then distracted and on something else, people don't know where they stand. They're not sure what role they're supposed to play. They get a little bit nervous and on edge. They say things to please or to survive, and then you maybe don't get told the things you need to get told. So I actually feel like the consistency element, particularly in such uncertain times, is a really important one. I always value it, but I probably value it even more now.
Yeah, exactly. And as you said, that it's it humanizes the leader as well. That they're not going to be just the person who knows all the answers and come. But almost admitting that it is a tough time. There's certain things we have to work out together.
Yeah.
So. And also, how's the transition? I don't know how for your own business and clients that you're working with in regards to remote working.
Yeah.
Where you're working remotely, and are you still finding the productivity at the same level, or has it been dropping, or has it improved in some cases?
It's a funny one. So, for us at Smart and Planning, the shift to remote really wasn't difficult at all, because I think we've always had a good deal of remote to our business. For clients, I think, retailers that I work with and talk to, I think that they've adapted remarkably well. I think everybody, if they just pause and look back, this is a blog topic I've been working on for a little bit, would be stunned at what they've achieved. You talked about it before. I was chatting with a client earlier this week. They are 3 years ahead of where they intended to be on their e-commerce path. Like, it's just it's just accelerated at such a rate. And I laugh because, I do talk so much about, about strategy and being responsible with strategy and so on. And I think if anybody had walked into the boardroom with a plan that articulated some of what's actually been achieved in these last few months, and walked in and put that on the table and said, this is what I want to do, and if we pull out all the stops, I'm sure we can achieve it, they would have been laughed out the room. And yet here we are, and businesses have done remarkable things. So I think that they've handled it super well. The shift to remote, I think there are probably a lot of very exhausted IT people out there that have had to deploy all kinds of applications to people working remotely, and think about the security that goes with all of that. I think teams have adapted extremely well with homeschooling and all the personal things that have come with this change, which they've not been easy. There's been a lot of fear and a lot of disruption, and people have had to deal with many things that they wouldn't normally have coming at them all at once under normal circumstances. It's been a big shift.
Resilience of individuals and teams that if they want to be able to, they had to get something done, you can somehow figure out an answer.
Yeah. What I think's been really nice actually is how tolerant, I guess, people have been, how understanding, when someone has had, a noise happen off to the side, when they're working remotely, dialed into a call, and, stuff just does happen. And I think, everyone's tried to be professional, but I think they've also tried to be understanding, which I think has been a really nice human element to the whole thing. So that's been good too.
Yeah, and I think once the post-COVID and people go back to normal, whatever the new normal will be, hopefully people will stop saying working from home, because normally it was implied that
yes,
that transition.
Well, I think the productivity, from what I've experienced, I actually think productivity's gone up. I always would joke, especially back when I was at Cotton On, their building is enormous, and I'd have meetings booked back to back, but one would be at this end of the building in my office, and the next one would be, two sort of football lengths away in another office, and yet they're booked back to back. And I would always joke about needing the travel time, and and then you get asked a few questions while you're walking down the corridor, and you arrive to your next one a few minutes late. And I think we all experience that, and weirdly, we're experiencing that travel time lag even in virtual meetings. I think people are super productive. They're getting so much done in a day. But there is this little lag between each meeting where you actually need to dial out of the team meeting and into the Zoom meeting, out of the Zoom meeting into the Skype meeting. There are those little, they're not travel delays, they're technology delays. Those are still there, but in the main, I think people are being very, very productive.
And people are missing out on the travel time as well, because in a way, the travel time was a bit of thinking time to just settle out from the previous meeting, because otherwise now you're just sort of going from one meeting to the other. There's a bit of fatigue kicking in. So
there's some interesting new what's the word, whether it's techniques or ways of working that are coming in with that, where I think people are starting to already realize booking the little 15-minute gap before the next meeting starts is a really good way to go. It gives you a chance to collect your thoughts, gives you a chance to grab a cup of tea, stretch your legs, and they are paying attention to the fact that that's probably necessary. But we're on a learning curve with all of those things. So, but I think there's been a lot of progress.
Perfect. I think that's pretty much what I had. So again, thank you so much, Susan, for making time to join the podcast. I really appreciate it. I think it was very insightful as always, and thank you for your time.
Thanks,